Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unraveling some truly profound philosophical concepts that deal with the very architecture of our joy and sorrow. If you've ever felt completely trapped by your own negative thoughts or just overwhelmed by setbacks, the source material we're looking at today offers a highly structured, almost mechanical way to reclaim your inner strength. We're going to break down exactly how you construct your reality, and much more importantly, how you can redesign it. Okay, so here's a pretty heavy question for you. Why do we sometimes, whether consciously or unconsciously, actually choose to hold on to our unhappiness? Just think about your own internal experiences for a second. Have you ever felt a weird sense of comfort in a bad mood? Or maybe found yourself obsessing over a past failure when you knew logically you should just move on? As we dive into our source text today, I want you to keep this question right in the back of your mind, because the answer we uncover might completely shift how you view your own mental habits. The insights we're unpacking today come straight out of the book Signpost to Happiness by Ryuho Okawa. Specifically, we're zeroing in on the first chapter. It meticulously outlines how our baseline happiness isn't actually dictated by external events, but rather by the specific mindsets we actively choose to adopt. The text argues, pretty emphatically, that changing our mindset and deliberately replacing negative thought patterns is the absolute prerequisite for happiness. All right, let's get into it. Section 1. Canvas of the Mind. To really understand how to fix our mindset, the source asks us to visualize our consciousness not as some passive receiver, but as an active workspace. And it gets quite literal with this concept. Happiness and unhappiness are, in reality, simply pictures drawn on the canvas of your mind. Think of your mind as the drawing paper. If you're experiencing happiness, well, it's because the image you've painted aligns perfectly with your true desires. But if you're experiencing distress, the text suggests it's because a continuous, undesirable picture is being projected and maintained right there on that inner screen. And that leads to this incredibly profound realization from the author. Unhappy people are constantly painting pictures in their minds that they do not truly desire. It's a massive paradox, isn't it? If you have an entire palette of beautiful, vibrant colors at your disposal, why on earth would you choose to paint with grays and blacks? The text really prompts us to aggressively audit our own thoughts. Are you unconsciously filling your mental canvas with dirty, dark colors that represent self-hatred, loss of confidence, or an inferiority complex? Moving on to Section 2, 3 responses to setbacks. So, if we acknowledge that those dark colors exist on our palette because of real-world failures, how do we handle them? The source provides a really structured framework here. It outlines 3 distinct choices we have when our canvas gets messy. We can accept the facts calmly, we can try again persistently, or we can use ingenuity to find a third path. Let's break down exactly how the author details each of these vital steps. First step is acceptance. Now, this might sound a bit passive at first, but it's actually a powerful cognitive reframing technique. The author explains that we so often view our failures as these massive, earth-shattering events. But to accept reality calmly, we actually have to zoom out. When you compare your current setback to the sheer scale of the entire world or the vastness of the universe, it shrinks. It becomes a minor, totally manageable event rather than some permanent catastrophe. The second response is persistence, but the source uses a brilliant continuation of our painting metaphor to explain what persistence actually looks like. It warns against staring obsessively at the metaphorical spilled ink, which is your failure. Instead of hopelessly trying to erase a mistake, the text advises us to extract the necessary lesson and then dedicate ourselves to painting beautiful, vibrant colors all around that dark spot. You literally integrate the failure into a larger, successful masterpiece. And then there's the third option, finding the third path. The source points out that sometimes we become slaves to the habit of losing, repeatedly failing in the exact same way. When this happens, sheer persistence just isn't going to cut it. We have to apply creativity and ingenuity. The text assures us that if we consciously look for a completely different angle, we'll often discover an unexpected exit or a loophole that allows us to break free from that frustrating cycle of defeat. Which brings us to Section 3, springboarding from inferiority complex. We've talked a lot about external setbacks, but what about our internal flaws? The source has this fascinating take on deep-seated feelings of inferiority. It's incredibly common to use an inferiority complex as a springboard for worldly success, right? Basically working twice as hard to prove yourself to the world. But the text argues that simply becoming successful doesn't erase the underlying pain. True peace, the author suggests, comes when you develop the emotional margin to reframe your past pain into humorous anecdotes. By being able to say, hey, I made this exact same foolish mistake too, you offer profound comfort to others who are currently suffering. So, the crucial point here is making a massive mental shift. The old way is suffering in silence, letting your inferiority act as a blade that continually cuts you. The new way, the mature way described in the text, is transforming that very same blade into a tool of relief. When you can literally laugh at your past failures to guide someone else through their current darkness, your own sense of inferiority is finally truly resolved. And finally, Section 4, transforming to giving love. This circles right back to that heavy question we asked at the very beginning. Why do we sometimes actively cling to our own misery? The author uses an absolutely brilliant metaphor here. The text suggests that some people actually develop a tendency to love misfortune. They wear their unhappiness like a familiar warm coat. And even though it's a coat of sorrow, taking it off feels frightening. They genuinely worry that without their problems, they'll be left exposed and shivering in the cold. So they subconsciously hold on to their grief because it provides this twisted sense of security. But the source doesn't stop at the metaphor. It diagnoses the root cause with a pretty tough truth. The tendency to love misfortune is fundamentally rooted in depriving love. People who cling to their unhappiness are often entirely focused on themselves. By constantly broadcasting their misery, they are unknowingly trying to draw energy, sympathy, and attention away from the people around them. There is a stark contrast at play here. Depriving love is the state of dwelling on personal worries, constantly looking inward and draining others for sympathy. The source argues, point blank, that you cannot cure this by thinking about yourself more. The only escape is a radical pivot toward giving love. That means shifting your entire focus outward and dedicating your energy to creating joy and blessings for the people around you. And this brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this passage. The text practically guarantees that the moment you actively start making others happy, the moment you sincerely wish for the success and joy of someone else without wanting a single thing in return, your own personal worries will naturally begin to vanish. You simply cannot maintain a dark canvas when your brush is entirely focused on painting light into someone else's life. Which leaves us with this final thought. You are the sole artist of your mind's canvas. You have the tools to zoom out from setbacks, to turn your past flaws into humor that helps others, and to trade that heavy, suffocating coat of self-pity for the absolute freedom of giving love. Based on everything we've unpacked from the source today, the choice is entirely in your hands. So what picture will you consciously choose to paint on your canvas today?
Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a brilliant philosophical framework that actually solves that exhausting cycle of constantly trying to prove ourselves to others. I mean, we all know that feeling, right? That deep-seated urge to make sure everyone in the room, or let's be real, everyone on our social media and LinkedIn feeds knows exactly how smart, successful, or capable we are. But what if that exact urge is the very thing holding us back from true happiness? Today, we're dissecting the superfine line between healthy ambition and the kind of toxic pride that just slowly drains our joy.
We're pulling all of this straight from a book called Signposts to Happiness, specifically zooming in on Part 1, Chapter 2. This chapter explores the really fascinating tension between our natural ambition and our toxic desire for self-display. The author, Ryuho Okawa, lays out a remarkable perspective that completely reframes how we look at our own egos. This isn't just someone telling you to be humble. It's a structural breakdown of the human spirit, and it is totally game-changing.
Okay, let's just run through a quick roadmap of what we're covering today. 1. Pride versus self-display. 2. The truth behind ambition. 3. The risk of lacking harmony. And 4. The 3 Fuku framework.
All right, jumping right into Section 1, Pride versus Self-Display, Setting the Boundary.
So, first things first, we really need to draw a clear line in the sand here. Having justified pride that actually matches your effort, your current standing, and your hard work, is completely natural. In fact, it's necessary. It serves as a driving force to keep going. But when that pride starts to morph into this bloated, peacock-like need to force everyone else to validate you, that's when you cross a dangerous line into self-display. It turns into an absolute obsession with external evaluation, which ultimately just drags everyone down, and most of all, it drags you down.
And the source text really hits the nail on the head right here. It points out that when our pride gets bloated, it forces us to constantly evaluate if we're overestimating ourselves. When our pride exceeds our actual merit, it creates this endless, agonizing loop. You start policing how others see you, constantly wondering why they aren't giving you the respect you feel you deserve. And honestly, this isn't just annoying for the people around you, it literally drags you into an abyss of your own suffering.
But that brings up a really fascinating follow-up question. If this bloated desire to show off causes so much internal pain and external friction, is this impulse inside of us fundamentally evil? Like, should we be trying to just crush our ambition entirely?
Which leads us perfectly to Section 2, the truth behind ambition, rooted in nature. So to figure out if this urge is actually evil, we've got to look at where it comes from, and its root is surprisingly tied to the natural world. If you look around, from colorful, blooming flowers to animals competing for strength, we see an evolutionary principle at play. The source text beautifully compares human self-display to a flower trying to bloom brighter than the rest, or a bird showing off its feathers. This isn't malice, it's a foundational survival mechanism. It's literally just life trying to assert its own existence and vitality in a very crowded world.
The big takeaway here is that your desire for validation isn't actually evil at its core. It stems from a completely natural human drive to grow, improve, and expand your existence. You want to be better today than you were yesterday, and hey, you want the world to acknowledge that growth. That is the engine of human progress. The problem doesn't lie in the engine itself, but in how we're steering the vehicle.
Moving on to Section 3, the risk of lacking harmony, the danger of success. But, and this is a big but, just because an instinct is natural doesn't mean we should just let it run wild. Think of your life as moving along two distinct paths. Ambition, that natural desire to grow and expand, is your vertical vector. You're shooting upwards. But you also live in a society with other human beings, which requires a horizontal vector of harmony, service, and care. Toxic self-display happens when your vertical vector shoots up way too fast and completely ignores that horizontal vector. When your personal evolution lacks harmony with your environment, it harms others, breeds jealousy, and totally isolates you by turning your potential allies into enemies.
And the text points out something really counterintuitive here to combat this. It notes that as people truly achieve success and reach higher stages of development, they actually become more silent and modest, rather than louder and more boastful. When you're genuinely growing, you just don't need to shout about it. True success naturally merges that vertical growth with horizontal harmony, creating this quiet, undeniable confidence that uplifts the people around you instead of demanding they applaud you.
All right, Section 4, the 3 Fuku Framework for lasting success.
So how do we actually do this? How do we maintain horizontal harmony and avoid falling into the trap of a toxic ego? Well, the text offers a really profound solution, starting with a concept called funpuku. This essentially translates to sharing your blessings, or sharing your cup when it overflows. The idea is that if you find success, your immediate next move has to be distributing a portion of that joy to the people around you. By doing that, you strengthen your horizontal vector of harmony, ensuring your success becomes something that truly gives life to others.
Okay, the second piece of the puzzle is shokufuku, which means planting blessings. Instead of greedily consuming all your current wealth or status right here and right now, you have to humbly plant seeds for the future. This means taking a piece of your success and investing it into the next generation, into future projects, or into the long-term betterment of society. It's a powerful way to acknowledge that your current success is just a stepping stone, which keeps your ego entirely in check.
And the third and final pillar is sekifuku, the discipline of conserving your blessings. This is where we directly combat that toxic urge for self-display. Sekifuku strictly forbids the wasteful, flashy spending that comes from a bloated ego. It means being modest and frugal even when you can totally afford not to be. It's about valuing the blessings you've received so much that you refuse to let them just leak out through the cracks of vanity. To really bring this concept down to earth, the author highlights a famous short story called Toshi Shun by Ryunosuke Akutagawa. It's about a guy who suddenly gets his hands on this massive amount of unearned wealth. Because he lacks sekufoku, because he immediately starts flaunting his riches by throwing lavish banquets, all these false friends flock to him. But the second the money runs out, everyone vanishes. His fortune slips right through his fingers because he used it solely to feed his bloated self-display, rather than conserving it or truly sharing it with purpose.
So when we look at this whole framework together, you can see how perfectly it balances out human nature. You have that vertical ambition that gets you the success in the first place, right? But then you apply funpuku to build your community, shokafuku to ensure sustainable growth, and sekafuku to protect yourself from the poison of your own ego. It's an absolute masterclass in transforming that loud, exhausting desire for attention into sustainable, quiet, and deeply impactful success.
As we wrap up this explainer today, I really want to challenge how you view your own ambition. We all have that inner drive to be seen and validated. It's natural.
But knowing what we know now about that delicate balance between the vertical vector of growth and the horizontal vector of harmony, I want to leave you with this final thought. Instead of worrying about who's looking at you right now, or how loud you can broadcast your current achievements, what is the next blessing you are going to plant for the future?
Welcome to This Explainer. I am so excited to jump into this with you today because we're tackling something that is, well, it's profoundly human. It's incredibly relatable and honestly a bit of a wake-up call. We're going to explore exactly why we subconsciously sabotage our own happiness. We'll be diving straight into Ryuho Okawa's brilliant analysis from his book, Guideposts to Happiness. Specifically, we're zooming in on Chapter 3, which unpacks a concept that might, literally, change how you view your own internal dialogue forever. Let's get right into it.
So, why do we end up hurting ourselves? It's a heavy question, right? You might even feel a little pang of recognition just hearing it. I mean, how many times have you caught yourself endlessly replaying a past mistake or maybe freezing up entirely because you're just absolutely terrified of failing in the future? This habit of being our own worst enemy, it's painful, but it's an almost universal human condition. We all want to be happy for sure, but our minds have this weird way of building invisible cages that keep us miserable. To understand why we do this, we really need to look at the specific term the author uses. Okay, let's dive into this core concept. The text defines this as the self-punishing spirit. It's a very specific psychological and spiritual mindset that actually actively gets in the way of your happiness. We're not just talking about feeling a little blue for a day. No, this is an ingrained habit where a person subconsciously abuses, blames, and sabotages themselves. It's like this internal broken record constantly whispering that you somehow deserve to suffer. But, where on earth does a destructive mechanism like that even come from? Well, the author actually breaks down the root causes of this self-sabotage into two distinct categories. On one hand, we have origins that stem from early childhood environments. These feel almost innate, right? Because they start so incredibly young. On the other hand, we have acquired origins. These develop much later in life, usually from a heavy accumulation of adult setbacks and just ongoing life struggles. Ultimately, both paths lead to the exact same destination, but the journeys getting there look pretty different. Let's look at the childhood ones first. You see, this self-punishing spirit often sprouts up incredibly early. The author notes that early traumatic experiences, like, say, being bullied in school or even kindergarten, they can embed this really deep subconscious tendency in a child to just expect harm from others. It's a tragic reality. Victims of early bullying often internalize that pain completely, and unfortunately, they carry this dark expectation right into adulthood, basically assuming that being hurt or harmed is just their default role in life. But wait, what about the people who develop this mindset later on? As adults, we go out into the world and inevitably things don't work out. We fail. It happens. But when those painful failures start to pile up, a completely new psychology takes hold. We begin to fear the sheer shock of future disappointment. So what does our mind do to protect us? We start preemptively punishing ourselves just to artificially lower our own expectations. And this brilliantly illustrates the author's incredible insight that adult self-punishment is, at its core, a misguided psychological defense mechanism. Think about it like this. Imagine bracing yourself for a fall on a gym mat by tensing your entire body and telling yourself, okay, this is gonna hurt. You're anticipating the blow to soften the shock. That is exactly what adult self-punishment is doing. The author uses this fantastic metaphor. It's like wearing armor that accidentally spikes inward. By constantly predicting your own failure and blaming yourself in advance, yeah, you might lessen the dramatic shock of an actual fall, but you end up causing yourself constant, agonizing internal pain every single day. Part 1, The Paradox of Perfection, Why Great Souls Suffer the Most. Now, it isn't just people who feel defeated who suffer from this. Surprisingly, this spirit often heavily afflicts those with immense hidden capability. The author writes that individuals with really high ideals, he actually compares them to giants who have sealed away their own enormous power. They often suffer terribly. Why is that? Well, there's a massive gap between their noble ideals and the harsh, often unfair reality of society. When the world treats them poorly, instead of fighting back, they turn all that frustration inward. They suppress their own greatness just to try and fit into a flawed world. And that friction creates some deep, profound spiritual suffering. And this leads to a very specific set of behaviors. Highly sensitive, empathetic, great souls frequently make the mistake of carrying intense, completely unwarranted guilt. When things go wrong around them, they actually believe they have to take on the sins of everyone else. The text beautifully but tragically compares this to an old horse or a camel taking on this massive, heavy load. They end up confusing unnecessary self-punishment with some kind of noble spiritual burden, completely trapping themselves in this endless cycle of stoic, self-imposed misery.
Let's move to and see how this builds into part 2, a prescription for the soul, breaking the cycle of self-sabotage. All right, so how do we actually break this cycle? The absolute first step is you have to step back. You need to objectively analyze your own psychological habits. This means looking at your childhood experiences, looking at your past failures, but doing it without letting your inner critic grab the microphone. You must recognize your mind's deeply ingrained tendency to self-punish as exactly what it is. It's a habit. It's a tendency. It's not some unchangeable truth about who you are. And once you can observe that habit objectively, you can finally start to change how you react to hardship. Which brings us to a really crucial shift in perspective. You have to move away from viewing failure as a reason to beat yourself up. Instead, try viewing it as vital nourishment for soul training. The author uses this wonderful image of waves. When a wave of failure comes, you can either let it repeatedly batter you and sink you, or, and this is key, you can choose to skillfully ride on top of it, extract the good from the experience, and actually use it as training to elevate your soul. So the crucial point is that navigating those waves requires a profound internal shift. You need to actively cultivate a calm, rich heart. You must dedicate yourself to forgiving others who have wronged you, maybe even the people who started you on this path way back in childhood. But most crucially of all, you have to abandon that extreme stoicism and genuinely allow yourself to be forgiven. You have to forgive yourself for your past and forgive yourself for your perceived flaws. And all of this builds toward one incredibly foundational realization. The author grounds this entire process of forgiveness in one ultimate spiritual truth. You are a child of God. Recognizing this inherent divine worth, that is the ultimate key to ending the cycle of self-abuse once and for all. You are not meant to live in a state of constant self-flagellation. When you truly realize that you carry a spark of the divine, the necessity for all that inward spiking armor, it simply melts away. Consequently, the text strongly urges us to stop equating worldly success or happiness with sin. Look, God does not desire your unhappiness. Punishing yourself simply because the reality of the world doesn't perfectly match up with your high ideals, it's fundamentally misguided. It goes entirely against your true nature as a child of God. You have to make the conscious decision to stop inviting this unfair self-punishment into your life. It's time to just drop the heavy burden you were never, ever meant to carry in the first place. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. The theories and insights we've gone through today are incredibly powerful, but, they only matter if you actually apply them. So I'm going to leave you with this. The very next time you face a failure or a painful setback, what will you do? Will you automatically put on that familiar painful armor of self-punishment? Or will you choose to recognize your worth, ride the wave, and truly forgive yourself? The choice is absolutely yours. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this helps you build a kinder, far more joyful relationship with yourself. Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating framework on time management and personal growth. Drawn from Part 2, Chapter 1 of Ryuho Okawa's writings, we're looking at what it takes to grasp literally the chance of a lifetime. But hey, this isn't your standard run-of-the-mill corporate productivity seminar. We're going to explore a highly structured, philosophical, and really spiritual take on how we manage our daily lives. Okay, let's dive right into this. So what if the 24 hours you live today aren't actually yours? Most of us wake up and just kind of implicitly believe that our time belongs to us, right? We talk about my time, spending my time, or wasting my time. But the source material we're exploring today flips this completely on its head. It asks us to consider our daily allotment of time as something borrowed, rather than something we own. In the text we're analyzing today, Guideposts to Happiness, we find this incredibly unique framework that essentially compares spiritual living to things like banking, asset management, and investing. It's a very practical, grounded metaphor applied to a deeply spiritual concept. Let's look at the first core principle. Section 1, the 24 hours deposited by God. This right here is the foundational paradigm shift the author introduces, the number 24. The text asserts that this daily 24-hour allowance, it's not our inherent property. Instead, it's an asset entrusted to us by a divine creator. Think of it like a daily deposit into your personal bank account. You don't generate this time yourself. It's given to you, freshly minted every single morning.
And as you might expect, with that deposit comes a specific set of expectations from the investor.
The text uses a really compelling banking metaphor here. If a bank just takes customer deposits, locks the cash in a giant vault, and never invests it to pay out interest, well, that bank is going to go bankrupt pretty fast. According to the framework, human beings are exactly the same. If a person selfishly hoards and consumes their 24 hours just for their own idle pleasure, without generating any kind of return on that investment, they face spiritual bankruptcy. Which brings us to Section 2, Paying the Interest of Love. So you're probably wondering, how exactly does one pay interest on a divine loan of time? In this framework, love is strictly defined. It's not merely an emotion or some passive feeling of goodwill. Acts of love, or altruism and self-cultivation, are the literal required interest that must be paid back to the divine creator. It's an action. Doing something for the benefit of the world, developing your soul, helping others out, this is exactly how you generate the yield on your 24-hour investment.
The author posits a pretty stark consequence here. If no interest is paid, the divine investor might just view that time investment as a total loss. The text metaphorically suggests that the creator might look at a wasted day and think, you know, the 24 hours I invested in you were completely pointless. Next time, I'll invest that time in someone else. It's a highly motivating, almost blunt perspective designed to eliminate spiritual laziness and enforce a real sense of daily accountability.
Moving on to Section 3, the three-stage thinking audit. To avoid that spiritual bankruptcy we just talked about, the text provides a really practical daily mechanism. Here's how this psychological audit breaks down. Step 1 is negative thinking, which actually means reviewing your reflections and finding your own faults. Step 2 is the middle way, which is all about avoiding extremes to seek a path of harmony. And only in Step 3 do we reach positive thinking, which focuses on seeing your strengths and producing actual growth. But why start with a negative? To explain the necessity of starting with your faults, the author uses a brilliant metaphor. Imagine trying to carry water in a leaky bucket, or trying to clean a floor using a completely filthy rag. No matter how many times you swap out the water, if the bucket has a hole, well, you're going to lose everything. If the rag is dirty, you're just spreading mud. This is exactly why the audit starts with the negative. You literally have to patch the holes in your own character and clean up your own mindset before you can hold or distribute anything positive. So, the crucial point is how you actually execute this audit. First, you clear out those negative traits, patching that leaky bucket. Once that's totally secure, you enter the middle way, a state where you avoid extremes and harm neither yourself nor others. From that stable, harmonized foundation, you can finally generate true positive production, really amplifying your strengths. And the ultimate goal of all this production is alignment, where your own private joy directly contributes to the public happiness of society. This is how the interest is truly maximized.
And that leads right into Section 4, the chance of a lifetime calling miracles.
This is really the culmination of the entire philosophy. Notice the progression of these concepts here. It moves from daily reflections and audits all the way up to grasping a chance of a lifetime, a once-in-a-millennium opportunity. The text argues that these massive breakthroughs, they don't just happen by accident. No way. They are the compounded result of our daily spiritual investments, coupled with a deepening vow to one's faith. By faithfully paying the interest of love every single day, rigorously auditing the mind, and deepening that spiritual commitment, an individual builds an incredibly strong foundation. And according to the source, it is precisely this foundation that acts like a magnet. It invites miracles. It actually allows you to recognize and seize those incredibly rare, golden opportunities when they finally cross your path, because you've done the daily work and cultivated the faith to prepare for them.
We've explored a pretty profound shift in perspective today. Moving from just spending time to actively paying interest on a divine loan through self-reflection, acts of love, and a deepened commitment. So I want to leave you with this final thought, drawn straight from the heart of the framework. Knowing that the clock is ticking on today's deposit, how will you invest your next 24 hours? Thank you for joining me for this explainer.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. So, you know that feeling when you just completely hit a wall? Personally, professionally, everything just kind of stalls out? Well, you're in exactly the right place today. We're going to take a super empathetic, but honestly pretty challenging look at how we reframe life's slumps. We're drawing directly from the spiritual insights in Ryuho Okawa's writings. And I'm telling you, this concept we're digging into today, it might literally change how you view your darkest days.
Because we've all wondered this at some point, right? Like, why is it that some people just completely crumble during hardships? while others somehow, I don't know, they actually grow stronger. It's completely valid if you're feeling exhausted by whatever personal or professional trials you're going through right now. But that difference, the gap between breaking down and breaking through, it usually comes down to a very specific type of inner strength.
Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, Life's Hardships and Slumps.
You know, it's so easy to talk about having willpower when things are going great, isn't it? We can all sit around on a sunny day and preach about resilience. But actually mustering that willpower during a full-blown crisis, man, that is a completely different, way harsher reality. During peaceful, everyday life, those comfortable, easy days, our willpower just naturally gets a bit soft. We get comfortable. But then boom, a sudden, storm-like event hits us, like a typhoon just tearing right through our routine. And something fascinating happens here. These massive shocks can actually awaken our dormant spiritual nerves and muscles. Sometimes, we actually need the storm to wake us up.
All right, let's really dive into this. When we hit a slump, it isn't just like a simple mental block. According to the text, a slump can actually force us into this state of extreme self-centeredness. We get incredibly vulnerable. We hyper-focus on our own pain, our own struggles. And because of that, we completely cut ourselves off from our guiding spirits. We basically just isolate ourselves inside our own minds.
And sadly, that isolation leads us right to Section 2, Beware the Evil Spirits' Whispers.
So the text reveals this hidden, unseen spiritual danger that pops up during these vulnerable times. It talks about evil spirits. Now hold on. It's absolutely crucial to understand what this actually means in this context. We're not talking about abstract monsters hiding under your bed. No, these are negative spiritual influences that prey directly on our emotional vulnerabilities. They're basically drawn to us when our minds get all clouded up with complaints and dissatisfaction during a slump.
Think of your emotions like a giant magnet. The source material outlines these specific negative magnets: dissatisfaction, complaints, foolishness, and unending desires. I want you to literally ask yourself right now, are you letting these exact feelings drive the bus today? Are you just sitting there in dissatisfaction? Because if you are, you're actively inviting those negative, unseen influences to just pull you deeper and deeper into the slump.
So how on earth do we fight back? Let's move to Section 3. What is the resolute spirit?
This right here, this is your ultimate weapon. The text defines this resolute spirit as a totally unyielding mindset. It's armed with this intense level of intellect and pure energy that you don't find it in ordinary, comfortable daily life. You only unlock it when you dig incredibly deep during adversity. It is a spirit that absolutely, unequivocally never retreats.
Just look at this powerful quote from the source. Stake on this truth, burn for this truth, stand up gracefully for this truth, and fight gracefully. I mean, there is just such an incredible urgency in those words, right? It highlights the absolute necessity of staking your very life on spiritual truth, on the law, rather than just wallowing in petty complaints. It's literally a call to arms for your soul.
Which brings us to how we actually do this. Section 4, the power of gratitude and love.
What's really interesting here is that having a resolute spirit isn't just about, grinding your teeth and toughing it out. White-knuckling your way through a slump, that doesn't work. True resilience requires two highly specific, actionable practices. The author uses this brilliant, super vivid metaphor of a golden rope connected to the truth or the divine law. This rope is your lifeline, but the very second we lose our faith, the second we give in to negativity, complaining, or self-pity, that knot on the golden rope just unties, and we just drift away into those negative influences.
So to keep that rope tightly knotted, the text gives us two explicit weapons to repel the negativity. Number 1, pure love without ulterior motives. You can't give to others hoping for some big reward. It has to be completely 100% selfless. And number 2, 100% absolute gratitude.
Actually, scratch that. I want to pause on that number for a second. 100%. The text specifically calls for 100% gratitude. Not 90, not 99, 100. And the promise here is just profound. If you can maintain absolute gratitude just for the fact that you're alive, that you're sustained by something greater than yourself, you will never fall under the control of negative spiritual influences. You basically become untouchable.
All right, let's bring it all home with our final section, Overcome Pitfalls, Refine the Soul. We're going to completely reframe whatever hardship brought you to this explainer today. We're taking it from a meaningless struggle and turning it into a deeply necessary test. The text introduces this concept of makyo, or spiritual pitfalls. These are inevitable traps, stuff like the desire for fame, the burning need to be respected,
or sudden economic issues that pop up when you're seeking the truth. These aren't signs that you failed. No way. Actually, hitting these pitfalls is proof that you're on an active path of spiritual training. Your soul is literally being refined in real time. And when you hit these pitfalls, the ultimate advice from the text is just brilliantly simple. Return to the starting point. Have a clean slate. You've got to drop those worldly attachments, clear your mind of your past glories or your current ego, and just return to your original pure intentions. And this perfectly illustrates what happens next. Once we clear out all those complaints and get back to that clean slate, we remember this massive, fundamental truth. We contain unlimited energy. The text states that deep, deep down within the core of our soul, we are directly connected to the very center of the universe. We have access to infinite light, courage, and energy, and it's completely untouched by whatever slump we happen to be facing on the surface.
So, as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Will you let complaints, dissatisfaction, and fear cloud your mind and untie your golden rope? Or will you use this violent storm you're facing right now to wake up your dormant strength and forge a truly resolute spirit? Because that energy, it's already inside you. It's entirely up to you how you use it. Keep pushing forward, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's explainer. We are embarking on a truly fascinating journey today, diving deep into a highly structured, incredibly thought-provoking philosophy. We're going to unpack a profound spiritual worldview that completely reframes how we look at our daily lives, our struggles, and ultimately our purpose. So let's just dive right into this.
So think about this core question for a second. What if the physical world we live in is merely a temporary training ground? It's a pretty powerful thought experiment, isn't it? It immediately challenges our standard, everyday perception of reality. I mean, if Earth is literally just a school, then who are we outside of the classroom? And what exactly are we supposed to be learning here? This specific premise is the absolute engine that drives the entire philosophy we're exploring today.
The source material for our explainer today is a book titled Guideposts to Happiness by Ryuho Okawa. Now, to make sure our learning is super focused, we're going to zero in specifically on the framework laid out in Part 2, Chapter 3 of this text. The author presents a highly structured, systemic view of the universe and the human mind here. My goal today is to neutrally unpack this architecture for you so you can clearly understand these concepts and see exactly how they logically connect to one another.
Okay, let's jump into Section 1, the soul's true home. To really grasp this philosophy, we first need to understand its map of the universe. And what's super interesting here is the stark, uncompromising line the author draws. On one side, we have our earthly world. The text explicitly defines this not as our permanent residence, but as a temporary training ground. It's a place designed for development. On the other side, we have what the author calls the real world, or the spirit world. According to the text, this higher dimensional space is the human soul's true, eternal home. So the crucial takeaway is that when we're born on Earth, we aren't starting our existence. We are simply going on an educational business trip, so to speak, away from our actual home.
To help us visualize this transition between worlds, the author uses a brilliant metaphor on page 137. He describes the descent from the high-dimensional real world to the physical Earth as being kind of like riding down in a glass elevator. As you go down, the harmony and bright faces of those higher realms begin to fade away, replaced by the harsher realities of the lower dimensions. The text says it looks like looking down through layers of water, where the scenery at the very bottom is shifting and flowing. It's a beautifully vivid way to describe the feeling of a soul becoming constrained by physical, three-dimensional reality.
Moving right along to Section 2, Watching Over, Nostalgic Spirits.
But the text assures us we definitely aren't sent on this earthly business trip alone. The author introduces a concept called the nostalgic people. And these aren't some distant, judgmental deities. They're described as our soul friends and siblings back in the real world. Their primary role? To constantly cheer on those of us living and struggling down here on Earth. Because they possess pure, infinitely expansive minds, they actually worry about us when we get caught up in trivial earthly matters and let our perspectives become super narrow and limited.
And this brilliantly illustrates what the author sees as the tragic irony of human life. Look at the stark contrast. On Earth, the text observes that we often build walls. We hide our hearts, we isolate ourselves, and we really refuse to be vulnerable unless we're with our closest friends. But in the spirit world, the exact opposite is true. The text states that in those higher dimensions, the split second a soul is in trouble, others immediately rush over to help. There's no hiding. It's a realm of total, absolute collaboration.
The author finds it pretty puzzling that we make life on Earth so incredibly difficult by shutting each other out, especially when our true spiritual nature is to rush to each other's aid.
Let's look at Section 3, the way of life, Geksei. So if that's how the universe actually works, how are we supposed to live while we're stuck here in the 3D world? Well, to bridge the gap between our temporary earthly training ground and our true heavenly home, the author introduces a highly specific operational philosophy for daily life. The text uses a term translated as intense sincerity, or Geksei. As defined, this means living your life authentically and purely. It means stripping away excessive ornamentation, social calculations, and any hidden agendas. The underlying logic here is that if you want to bring the cooperative, open nature of the spirit world down to earth, you have to start by completely dropping your own mask. You literally have to operate with absolute, intense sincerity in all your dealings. Next is Section 4, Strong Faith in God/Buddha.
But, as you might guess, intense sincerity alone isn't quite enough to reach the highest levels of spiritual development discussed in the book. The text argues that a strong faith in God, Buddha, or a higher power is the necessary bedrock for human elevation. However, it's very specific about what this actually means. The author absolutely doesn't define faith as just blindly following rules. Instead, true faith is framed as an internal discovery. It's about looking within your own conscience, finding the truth that resonates there, and realizing that this inner truth is actually the direct guidance of a higher power. It's a deeply personal, internal awakening to the divine. And when you gather enough people who are actively living with that intense sincerity and that deep internal faith, something remarkable happens, according to the text. They form what is called a bodhisattva world. The author's ultimate social vision isn't just about escaping Earth, it's about transforming it. It's the ambitious goal of importing the trust, harmony, and spirit of the higher dimensions directly into our 3D society. It's creating an ideal, high-vibration community right here in the middle of our temporary training ground.
And finally, Section 5, Toward an Incomparable Spirit. This brings us to the real climax of the chapter and the ultimate goal of the individual's spiritual journey. The original Japanese chapter heading points us directly to this final, highly elevated concept. Everything we've discussed today, recognizing our true home, feeling the support of higher spirits, living with intense sincerity, and holding strong faith, is all preparation for this singular goal, cultivating an incomparable spirit. So what exactly is it? Well, the text makes a really fascinating distinction here. The incomparable spirit is not described simply as a ghost or a discrete entity. Rather, it is a state of mind. It's a pure, unchanging, ideal state of being that perfectly aligns with divine will. It's a mind that is no longer tossed around by the relentless waves of earthly drama, but instead rests on a solid, unshakable foundation of truth. It is, essentially, the human soul shining at its absolute brightest. Fortunately, the author doesn't just leave this as some abstract ideal floating in the clouds. Page 151 lays out a very specific, actionable three-step process for getting there. First, you've got to engage in the constant daily work of removing impurities and selfish thoughts from your heart. Second, you must direct your thoughts absolutely and unwaveringly toward the divine. And third, and honestly, perhaps most importantly, you must acknowledge your own smallness in the grand scheme of the universe and humbly surrender. It's precisely through this profound humility that the incomparable spirit is actually forged. Which brings us to our final takeaway and a question for you to ponder. We've mapped out a worldview where Earth is literally just a school, where invisible friends are constantly cheering for you, and where your ultimate goal is a state of pure, unwavering sincerity. Knowing this worldview, even just as a thought experiment, how will you choose to navigate your own temporary training grounds starting today? Will you drop your masks? Will you look for the deeper truth in your own conscience? It's a really powerful framework to consider. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next one.
Welcome back to The Explainer. If you clicked on this today, maybe you're feeling kind of stuck, exhausted, or just completely burned out right now. If that's you, I want you to take a deep breath. You're in exactly the right place. Today, we're unpacking a really powerful framework from our source material for not just surviving, but truly understanding those heavy, low-energy periods in our lives.
I want you to really reflect on this for a second. Why do our lives suddenly stall? I mean, we've all been there, right? Everything is going great, you're making progress at work, your relationships are smooth, you're feeling energized, and then, bam, you hit a brick wall. It feels incredibly heavy, it's frustrating, and honestly, it can make you question absolutely everything you were so sure of just a few weeks prior.
All right, let's jump right in with Section 1, the inevitability of slumps. The very first mental shift we need to make today is realizing that hitting a low point is absolutely not a personal failure. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Our source material, specifically Part 2, Chapter 4 on overcoming slumps, reveals some profound wisdom on how to navigate these exact periods gracefully, analyzing them deeply instead of just panicking and flailing around.
The text completely redefines what we're actually experiencing here. A slump isn't just a string of bad days or a run of bad luck. As it outlines, it's a fundamental life wave, a natural biorhythm. Even the people who seem to live perfectly smooth, incredibly successful lives, they inevitably encounter these waves too. It is completely built into the long human experience.
So, the crucial point is understanding the difference between how a slump feels in the moment and what it actually is. It is an illusion to think of it as a punishment, or worse, to convince ourselves it's a permanent failure. In reality, the source gently shifts our perspective to show that a slump is a period for recalibration. It's a spiritual test, a time when you're basically being tempered, like steel in a fire, to prepare you for what's next.
Once we accept that slumps are natural, we move to Section 2, identifying the root causes.
So why do we suddenly get pulled into these low periods in the first place? The text clearly outlines 3 primary triggers. First, sudden changes in previously favorable external conditions. Maybe things were just too good for too long and suddenly the bottom drops out. Second, shifts in how we evaluate ourselves, like a sudden harsh loss of confidence. And third, there are just inevitable life cycles and periods of spiritual destiny at play. Try to logically pinpoint which of these might have triggered your own recent stall. Recognizing that trigger leads us directly into Section 3, the danger of overheating.
We really need to slow down a bit here and talk about the very real danger of running your life at absolute full speed without ever taking a breather. I absolutely love this quote from the source material. It says, "Think of a car engine. If it overheats, it breaks down." The author explains that your soul actually acts as an automatic control device. When you are going too hard for too long, a slump isn't a failure. It's a built-in protective mechanism forcing you to stop before you completely destroy your own engine. There are severe physical and spiritual consequences to ignoring our own exhaustion. Sometimes, when a person is pushing relentlessly, a spiritual pause is triggered precisely to prevent a total physical breakdown. Your energy is entirely depleted, and your body is literally being forced by your soul to halt just so it can survive. Think about it like this. A spring must compress before it can jump. A battery absolutely has to recharge after discharging all of its power. If you are in a slump right now, give yourself permission to just be that compressing spring. You aren't broken. You're recharging.
Which brings us to Section 4, a time for rest.
This is all about honoring what your mind, your body, and your soul are demanding of you right now. The text defines this phase beautifully as a soul rest period. This is an absolutely essential time to gather your energy. Listen to me. It is not a time to panic. If you try to aggressively force your way out of a slump by just working harder and stressing more, you are only going to overheat the engine further. You just have to accept this time as a necessary gathering of energy. So, how do we actually rest without driving ourselves crazy? That brings us to Section 5, cultivating peace of mind. To endure and actually heal during this resting phase, we need to look at exactly what to avoid and what to embrace. An ego mindset deepens the slump, panicking, acting out of arrogance, extreme energy expenditure. But the cure is what the source calls the middle way. Instead of rushing, you rest and observe. Instead of arrogance, you practice humility and gratitude. You adopt a leisurely, balanced attitude. Cultivating this immovable peace of mind is exactly what prevents us from getting stuck in our own suffering.
Because if we stay in that ego mindset, we run into what the source describes as a spiritual disconnect. Think back when things were going well. Maybe you forgot your gratitude, got a little arrogant. The text makes a fascinating point here. In a slump, people often become incredibly self-centered, acting like a sick person who can only focus on their own localized pain. This isolation and egoism can actually attract negative spiritual influences. So a slump essentially forces us to shed this ego and reconnect with our gratitude and higher purpose. Shedding that ego leads us directly to Section 6, escaping the predicament. This is where we start building that forward momentum to finally break through to the other side. During your recovery phase, you need to ask a vital question. What are you actually meant to learn from this downtime? Why were you given this specific phenomenon to experience right now?
Stepping back to discover the true meaning behind your struggle is literally the key to unlocking the exit door.
If you are still feeling down on yourself, the text offers this profound reassurance. A slump is ultimate proof of past glory. Think about it. A completely mediocre, flatline life does not experience true slumps because there were no peaks to fall from. The very fact that you are in a slump right now means you are striving for greatness. You had real momentum.
So let's synthesize all of this wisdom into a clear path out. Here are the steps straight from the text. Step 1. Accept your soul's demand for rest completely without anxiety. Step 2. Shed any arrogance that built up during your peak and return to a state of deep gratitude. Step 3. Cultivate that peace of mind, that middle way, so you don't overheat again. And finally, Step 4. Once you are truly rested and recalibrated, tap into your infinite internal energy to step forward confidently.
We're going to leave it there for today, but I want to leave you with this one reframing question. How will you use your current period of rest to prepare for your next incredible leap forward? Remember, the spring is just compressing. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Take a deep breath, give yourself permission to get some rest, and I'll catch you next time.
Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're diving into a Japanese philosophical text that's basically going to flip the way you think about the hours in your day. We're going to explore how to blend intense, fiery passion with a cool, refreshing detachment to achieve something truly remarkable, a state where we live fully without being constantly thrown around by the immediate joys or sorrows of our daily lives. So let me ask you right off the bat, how do you actually experience the time you're given? Are you constantly burning out from all that pressure, or kind of just drifting through the days without a spark? Just take a second and think about where you fall on that spectrum right now. It's a huge modern dilemma, right? We're often stuck bouncing between two really painful extremes. One day, we're completely consumed by this fiery, exhausting ambition that just drains our mental reserves, and the next, we're drifting aimlessly in this hollow state of lethargy. Well, the text we're breaking down today offers a pretty incredible dialectic solution to help us not just survive this whiplash, but actually thrive. All right, let's kick things off with part 1, the spark of passion. This is the thesis of our whole framework. The author asks us to totally rethink time. Toss out the idea of time as just a ticking clock on the wall. Instead, think of it as an internal, fiery experience. The text calls this hot time. It's that period where your soul is just physically excited. You're moving forward relentlessly, completely locked into your goals in the pursuit of success. To really hammer this home, the author uses this awesome visual metaphor. Picture glowing, burning iron, like a newly forged sword. The idea here is that time actually heats up and responds directly to the level of passion and fight we bring to it. Time isn't just this passive thing happening to you. It reacts to your heat. If you bring a burning desire to your day, time literally becomes this hot, malleable resource you can shape. But there's a really important catch to hot time. Yes, we need intense heat, but it shouldn't be this chaotic, outward explosion that burns everyone around us. Actually, think of it more like a firefly. The text suggests we keep this passion glowing inwardly. It's a sustained, selfless glow dedicated to bringing light and joy to others, rather than just some selfish fire that consumes everything. Now, because unchecked passion can so easily morph into a destructive obsession, we've got to introduce its exact opposite. If hot time is our fiery, result-driven energy, we have to balance it out with what the text calls a refreshing life. This is a state of detached, graceful, and breezy acceptance. You literally can't have one without the other. Which brings us perfectly to part 2, embracing a refreshing life. This is the antithesis in our framework, and it's all about cooling our internal engines. So, what does a refreshing life look like? It means living with the crispness of a gentle May breeze. It means stepping entirely free from that heavy, sticky attachment to our results. It's about doing the work, sure, but refusing to swing wildly from pure joy to crushing sorrow over every single outcome. You just can't let the daily ups and downs dictate your emotional state or your self-worth. The author puts a massive emphasis on gracefulness here. We have to give our absolute full effort, but accept the results gracefully. Basically, you throw your absolute all into your hot time, but when the dust settles, no excuses. You maintain this pure, clean, breezy attitude, whether you just had a massive win or a crushing defeat. Now, you're probably wondering, how do we possibly hold both of those things at once? How do we care so much, yet let go so completely? Let's move to part 3, a transcendent perspective.
To reconcile these opposing forces of hot passion and cool breezes, we need a much higher vantage point. And I absolutely love the metaphor the source uses to ground us here. Imagine an enormous passenger ship that never sinks, just floating peacefully on the Pacific Ocean. Even when our daily lives feel like choppy, stressful waters, we have to cultivate a part of our mind that acts like that massive ship. It's a reminder of our soul's infinite nature, unshakable and calm no matter how much chaos is happening down in the engine room.
The text explains that we actually have to navigate life using two viewpoints simultaneously. On one hand, we have the finite life perspective. That's where we focus on efficiency, hard work, and maximum effort, simply because our time on Earth is limited. But at the exact same time, we've got to hold the infinite life perspective, focusing on our eternal journey with that peaceful, unshakable calm. We essentially shift gears between these two depending on what the situation demands. And to actually pull this off, the text gives us a fantastic practical tip. Try viewing your life from the 1st or even the 30th century. When you adopt this sweeping, transcendent view across time and space, your immediate anxieties, those missed deadlines, and all those worldly attachments suddenly start to look incredibly small and totally manageable. And that leads us right into our final section, Part 4, Living in Transparent Time. This is the beautiful synthesis of everything we've talked about today. This right here is the ultimate goal outlined in the text, transparent time. It's that exact moment where your hot, burning passion and your cool, breezy detachment merge perfectly. The result? A clear, beautiful, friction-free existence. You're outputting massive energy, but because you aren't obsessively attached to the outcome, your time feels completely pure and transparent. The author strongly advocates for this as the ultimate way to approach modern life. It's an incredibly active state. You are thriving right now in the present moment, attacking your goals with intense hot energy. Yet, and this is the absolute secret, you maintain a cool, detached spiritual clarity. You are fully engaged in the world, but you aren't weighed down by it at all. To sum up this profound framework, we can distill it down to 4 practical steps. First, fuel your goals with absolute passion. That's your hot time. Second, gracefully release your iron grip on the final outcome. That's your refreshing life. Third, adopt that sweeping, transcendent perspective, like the massive ship on the ocean. And finally, by doing all 3, you get to experience life as a clear, unburdened flow, which is transparent time.
So I want to leave you with a challenging question. Tomorrow, when you wake up, will your time burn out from obsession? Will it drift away into lethargy? Or will you put in the work to make it beautifully transparent? It's a tough balance to strike, for sure, but it is perhaps the most rewarding pursuit we can take on with the limited time we've been given. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope it helps you find your own transparent time.
Welcome to the Explainer. I'm so glad you're joining us today, because we're about to dive into something literally life-changing. We're tackling a super profound philosophy that gets right to the core of how we actually use our unique individuality. I mean, we all want to stand out, right? We all want to make our mark on the world, but how do we do that in a way that truly matters? Today we're exploring Part 2, Chapter 6 of our source material, and it offers this stunning roadmap for personal and spiritual maturation. It's really all about shifting our perspective to find real, lasting fulfillment.
Our anchor for today's journey is the source book Guideposts to Happiness, or Kofuku no Dohyo. Specifically, we're going to unpack a really powerful 3-stage framework from this text. It's a framework that guides us from simply having potential to making active choices about how we grow, and finally reaching this ultimate state of spiritual maturity. If you've ever felt like you're just, spinning your wheels trying to be original, this text offers a completely fresh lens to view your life's purpose through.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll be covering 1. Life and originality. 2. The freedom to bloom. 3. The root of good intention. 4. Energy of creation. 5. Love without reward. And finally, 6. The lighthouse in the dark. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Life and Originality, the Seed of Potential.
Okay, so before we can figure out what it actually means to be truly unique, we kind of have to understand where that uniqueness comes from in the first place, right? The text states this brilliantly. It says, since humans are children of God, they are expected to bloom the flower of life with the individuality they were given. So basically, your originality, it's not just some random accident. It is a divine expectation. You were given a very specific set of traits and talents, not just to hoard them, but to actively express them. You're meant to bloom your own specific flower of life.
Moving right along to Section 2, the freedom to bloom. So how exactly are we supposed to use this awesome gift of individuality? There's this absolutely beautiful metaphor in the text here. The author compares human growth to flowers that are endlessly seeking the sun. Think about it. Just as all flowers stretch upward toward the light to survive, we're all entirely equal in our fundamental pursuit of growth. We all want to reach that light. Yet, while that upward reach is universal, the way we actually bloom, the colors, the shapes, the specific petals we choose to form, that is where our total, unrestricted freedom lies. Your bloom is going to look completely different from the person sitting next to you, and honestly, that is exactly the point.
But here is the real kicker, and we have to pay attention to how the source defines this freedom. It's very specific. Freedom here is defined as the limitless energy to grow. It's a strictly forward, upward momentum. What it is emphatically not is the liberty to harm others, to cause trouble, or to intentionally fall backward. The text draws a super clear line here. True freedom is all about constructive, expansive development. If your version of freedom is hurting someone else, well, you've completely misunderstood the assignment.
Which naturally brings up a pretty serious, grounded question, and I want you to really reflect on this for a second. Is all originality inherently good? Like, if someone invents a highly original, super creative way to steal from people, is that the kind of blooming the universe expects? Spoiler alert, no. And this serves as our pivot right into the second act of the maturation arc.
Section 3. The root of good intention.
To answer that previous question, the author introduces this absolutely crucial constraint, good intentions, or zenaro shiko. Now, what's really interesting about this part is the author's stark warning. The text makes it incredibly clear that if our original ideas, no matter how clever or totally unique they seem, are rooted in dark or hellish thoughts, they aren't true originality at all. If the base of your idea is anger or extreme selfishness or just wanting to pull others down, it holds literally zero value in the grand scheme of creation.
Let's walk through this incredibly sharp contrast the text provides. On one side, you have selfish originality. This is totally ego-driven. The author describes living a self-centered life as just a pitiful, lonely run. Sure, you might be running fast, but you're running entirely alone, producing nothing of any lasting value. But on the flip side, we have originality with good intention. This type of originality constantly wishes for everything to improve. It's world-improving. It desires the good of all. It's constantly asking, hey, how can my unique flower make this whole garden better for everyone?
That takes us to Section 4, the energy of creation.
So why is good intention such a strict requirement? Well, the answer is found in this massive, powerful thesis statement. The text says, at the root of this world is good energy. The base of creation is good. I mean, just pause and think about what that means for you. If the actual fabric of the universe is built on good energy, then aligning your unique talents with good means you're literally syncing up with the energy of creation itself. You aren't just being a nice person, you are plugging your individuality directly into the ultimate power source of the universe. How cool is that?
All right. Section 5. Love without expecting reward.
Once you plug into that power source, your individuality transcends the self entirely. According to the source, when originality is paired with good intention, it ultimately transforms into just another form of love. There is this absolutely magnificent metaphor here. The text compares it to a timeless piece of music. Think of a masterpiece that continues to nourish people's souls across generations long after the composer is gone. That music never asks for a reward from the listener today, does it? True originality acts exactly like that. It is an endless, unselfish expression of love that enriches the world infinitely without asking for a single thing back. And finally, Section 6, the lighthouse illuminating darkness. To tie this whole philosophical journey together, the author asks us to envision a lighthouse. Let's break down this majestic metaphor step by step, because it's a real game changer. First off, a lighthouse shines its light for a very specific reason, to guarantee the safety of others navigating treacherous waters. Second, it stands tall, piercing the darkness of the past, present, and future as this totally constant, reliable beacon. And third, it gives infinitely. A lighthouse never asks the passing ships for anything in return. A fully matured, uniquely blooming individual operates exactly like this. They use their specific talents to serve as a beacon of infinite mercy and safety for the world around them.
And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate culmination of our journey today. The text draws upon these powerful images of the lighthouse and the North Star, explaining that God places these guiding lights in the dark sea of life to help us along. But here is the amazing twist. We are ultimately expected to mature to the point where we become that exact same guiding light. You're meant to take your freedom, pair it with good intentions, and bloom so incredibly brightly that other people can navigate their own darkness just by following your light.
We've journeyed all the way from a simple seed of potential to a beacon of infinite love. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with one final, deeply personal thought to chew on. Who are you shining your light for?